Cerrie Burnell is an actress, singer, playwright, children's author and former television presenter for the BBC children's channel CBeebies. She is one of the few visibly disabled presenters on television and featured in The Guardian's 2011 list of 100 most inspirational women, receiving praise for tackling disability head-on. Her first picture book, Snowflakes, was published in 2013, and she has since written a number of both picture books and junior fiction titles, including Harper and the Sea of Secrets and The Girl with the Shark's Teeth. She is also the current writer-in-residence for Book Trust. Nikki Gamble met recently with Cerrie to talk about her latest novel, The Ice Bear Miracle.
I wanted to start really because one of the wonderful things about your novel is this beautifully imagined setting in the Arctic. There are actually two main places, aren't there, in the Arctic?
Yes.
The Canadian side and then over on the Russian Siberia,
the carnival.
Greenland. Or
Yes.
What is it? There are quite a few books at the moment that seem to have this attraction to the north. What's the allure of the Arctic?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's that magnetic pull, that sort of unknown landscape where you have very strange daylight hours. A lot of the time you're in darkness, and then you have no darkness and all light. And a lot of it is sort of, to my mind at least, undiscovered. You know, it's a very vast, very sort of muted landscape, and obviously very cold. And I feel like there's this real sense of magical things happening when you've got a time that doesn't really stick to the same time as the rest of the world, and you've got these strange seasons that just completely take over. So, you know, in the summer it's kind of warm all day, and then in the winter it's almost unlivable. And I feel like when the daylight and the atmosphere and the kind of world that you're in is out of sync to everything else, that's a real setting for magical things to start to happen.
We'll talk about what some of those things are in a moment, but because you mentioned the strangeness of the time, it is a book that when you're reading it feels both timeless, but you do pull us back to the present. You know, there are things that are of the here and now, and it is that notion that it almost belongs to another time, this northern, mystical, magical place.
So as you said, there are two settings. So the island, the Isle of Bears, where Marv lives, is very much now, it's fictional, but it could be a place that you could visit. And there is a place which I sadly haven't visited, but there is a place in Canada called Churchill, which does have a polar bear migration go through it, and does have that extreme weather, and does have a small windswept community who have to live alongside polar bears, you know, throughout the winter or until the sea ice freezes. So I really wanted the Isle of Bears to be sort of not 100% believable, but somewhere that you could definitely imagine visiting. Whereas Tuesday's World, which is the Carnival of the Northern Stars, is very much where the sense of magic comes in, I think, or enchantment, and it's drawing on all those sort of fictional circuses and carnivals that we've all read about in stories from our own childhoods. But it's slightly different because this is a carnival that's happening on the ice, so it's all ice-based, it's all ice skating, and of course the star of the carnival is the ice skating polar bear.
I took you straight in really to thinking about the setting, but perhaps for listeners we should just set up what the story is about.
Yes, it begins with a young boy who we come to know as Marv waking up in the middle of the night on this island where there is the polar bear migration, and because of that all the townspeople leave their cars unlocked and their back doors unlocked in case someone finds themselves facing a polar bear and they need to escape, or, you know, in case travellers suddenly turn up in the middle of the night or the dark, that, you know, which could really be any time, and they need a refuge. So he wakes up and he thinks he can hear a baby crying. And of course, the rules are you don't go out on your own at night, and you never look a polar bear in the eye. But he's new to the island. The family have just come from Toronto, and you know he's a small kid, so he's not really taking heed of these rules. And he hears this baby crying, and so he goes out of his house, and by chance he has all of his ice hockey gear on, including the protective helmet, which is like a cage that covers his face, and he's got his skates on as well. He's come from training and he's fallen asleep on the sofa in all of the kit, as if by magic. And he finds a baby on the ice. And with the baby, or near the baby, is a little adorable, very small polar bear cub. But it's slowly getting nearer and nearer to the baby, and he thinks, oh, do you know what, I need to... I'm not threatened, it's really cute, but I need to get this baby away. But he can't lift it up because he's only a child, and he keeps nearly falling over. So he manages to push the baby down the river and, you know, the frozen river, out of the way. But then Mama Bear turns up, and she doesn't like him being near to the baby bear, and so she attacks. And luckily, because he's got the helmet on, it saves his life. He doesn't remember the attack. All he sort of remembers is what happens next, which is that everyone hears the noise and, you know, comes running from their houses, and they're throwing everything at the bear: salad bowls, shoes, furniture, TV remotes, just anything to try and stop it. And finally, someone has a rifle that they misfire that doesn't kill the bear, but it shocks her enough to drop him. And then she goes, and he's left with this sort of crescent moon scar on his face. And this story that precedes him wherever he goes on the island, which is that he's the boy who fought a bear and won, even though he knows that that's not really what happened. And the next day, you know, when he's recovered, he says to his parents, what about the baby? And they say, what do you mean, what baby? And no one will believe him that there was a baby. And he's convinced that there was, and he never really gives up that notion. But who is she? Where is she? What was she doing out on the ice? You know, what happened to the little cub? And once a year on Marv's birthday, the same bear who gave him his scar, so the mama bear, comes back to the island with all of the bears, and she just waits outside his window, and she just does this very kind of soulful, sad sort of growl, but it, you know, it's almost like a song. And at first this is very unsettling for him and his family, but with time it's almost like a ritual, and they come to realise that she is mourning something, and she's trying to communicate something to Marv, but he doesn't know what. And all he can think is that she lost her cub on that night, and somehow the cub must be connected to the baby.
What a beautiful setup. Anyone will want to read the story.
I hope so.
That. You haven't, and I can just reassure everybody that you haven't given too much away. This happens very early on.
It does,
in the novel.
This is chapter 1. So.
As well as this wonderful setting, we have to talk a little bit about the skating, which there's two different kinds of skating in this book. Tell us about the two different kinds of skating first.
Well, so this was news to me as well, because I just sort of thought, oh, you know, ice skating, great, you know, it's just something we do at Christmas. But it wasn't until myself and my daughter started taking very basic figure skating lessons at Streatham Ice Rink. And then I suddenly realised that a whole world of winter opened up to me, and I realised that actually, there are two completely different disciplines, and one of them is figure skating, which is ice dancing, you know, what we associate with the Olympics, or dancing on ice, or Disney on Ice, or, you know, which is very graceful, very controlled. very precise. The blade of the skate is almost like an extension of the ice skater's body, almost like it's the tip of their toe. And it's balletic, it's powerful, but in a very balletic kind of a way. And then the opposite of that is ice hockey, which is just hell for leather, everyone just cramming on, fighting on the ice, falling down, popping back up, as no blood has been lost, and it's just a wonderful chaos. There are different types of skates, so figure skates are completely different to hockey skates, which are a lot chunkier and they seem to glide a lot more. But the mentality is completely different. So, in ice hockey, it's about speed, really, and you don't have to be graceful. I mean, I think that hockey players are very graceful, the way they lean and they kind of screech to a stop, and just the coordination and the brutality, but also the quickness of it is astonishing, really, to watch. And I am definitely not at that point in ice skating. I'm very much a beginner, and it's slow going. But it is that real sense of freedom, and it is so addictive and so lovely.
I wanted to ask you about that sense of freedom. There's a point in the story where Tuesday, your heroine, says on the land she was a child, and on the ice she was queen of the universe, which kind of conjures up that sense of being bigger than yourself, freer than yourself. And I interviewed another writer not so long ago, Jill Lewis, who'd written a book about cycling, the early days of cycling, and that had that same sense of liberating you from yourself. Is that how you feel when you're on the ice?
On a good day, yes. And there are plenty of times when I've fallen, but I think if you want to progress, then you have to be willing to fall, even though it's not nice, but the thought of it is normally worse than the actual tumble. But yeah, I think it's the glide and the smoothness and the fact that you can suddenly travel so fast in a way that you probably haven't done since you were a child. I do find that really freeing and liberating, and from a sort of wellness point of view, although that's not why I started skating at all, but I know lots of people at the ice rink who sort of really commit to skating, not to become amazing skaters, but from a mental health point of view, just to have a time where you can't really be thinking about anything else on the ice. You've got to shut down and focus on what you're doing, otherwise you're going to go flying.
So I want to, we've talked about this passion for skating, which really comes through. I knew as I was reading it that you must have had experience of skating. You can just tell. But that by itself doesn't make a story. So tell us about where the idea for the story came from.
Oh gosh, okay. Well, I grew up with a very rich sort of literary-based childhood, having books read to me, and I've always loved that kind of heritage of different themes working their way through different books, filtering through. We're also influenced by fairy tale and all the modern retellings and all the different works that we've read today, and The Northern Lights is one of my absolute favourite books, and of course I love Pan and Lyra's relationship and that demon bond, but I also love the bear, and I love that he names Lyra Silvertongue, and I just love that he bashes stuff up, and he's very beary throughout the whole thing, and I love that energy. And I was just thinking, how could you do that? How could you have that relationship where it was sort of real and it was almost believable that you could have a child and a bear having this bond? But it's not a magical bear. It is literally a bear. It doesn't speak. It does ice skate, but only because it's been sort of forced into it and trained into it. And unfortunately, that has happened in the world. There are circuses that do that to their animals and bears. And so, I'd had that idea for a long time. And then I read an article in The Guardian, I think, about Churchill, about this place in Canada. it was about a girl who had survived a bear attack, and she was so sort of gracious about it and so understanding of the bear, and almost not proud, but you know, she just accepted that was part of life, that, you know, the bears have been here for all of time. We're the ones that have made our home in their pathway, so it's us that need to get on with it, not them. And she wasn't going to move. She was going to carry on living there, and her scar was her story. And I just thought, wow, you know, that what an amazing thing, and what an incredible community, and all the different, you know, the lightness and the dark, and throughout all of time, you know, I mean, now, you know, we're in a society where we can film everything and we can police everything and we can be aware of everything, but in times gone past, you know, you were saying the story feels timeless, but it would have been, because at some point those very northern communities would have been completely cut off from the rest of the world, and they would have made their own rules. And the bears would have been a part of that, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
That would have been one of the main rules, you know, you avoid the bears, or you know, you suffer the consequences. And so I, you know, after that I just was, I really couldn't stop thinking about it, and, you know, having this idea of this boy having the bond with the bear, but then why was he outside? And then I sort of discovered ice hockey, and I found out about the fact that as part of the game you can throw down your glove, and that symbolises that you're going to fight someone on the ice. And I can't imagine anything worse than being punched while I've got ice skates on, but that happens within that game. And it, you know, the courage and just the mindset that you need for that. And I thought, okay, no, if the child was a hockey player, then, you know, that would feed into it, and he would, that would be a way of him surviving this bear attack and sort of being proud of it. And the islanders, the community, they believed that the reason he left the house was to practice ice hockey, and so they completely forgive him, and they nickname him Marvel, and they treat him like a hero. And so then I had to figure out, you know, who was the other character? Who is this baby? And I realised actually that it was her who was going to have the relationship with the bear. But, you know, you couldn't have a child and a bear ice skating together now. So that's why the carnival had to be sort of mystical or mythical almost, and very unknown, and it appears and disappears, and it travels through the dark, and, you know, no one knows where it's going to show up next. It's almost impossible to track, and that is how they get away with raising a girl and a bear together. But of course the bond is for life, and they can't exist without the other.
Let's talk about your ice skating bear, who's called Promise.
Yes.
Lovely word, that, because it carries with it so many
hope,
meanings.
really.
It's hope, it's about freedom. It's also about a contract and a bond, isn't it, between two people. So it's just such a rich name to give your bear. And of course there's a sensitivity. He is a performing bear, and there's a sensitivity towards that. There's a part, I think, where Marv, I think is it his coach, that he asks how you would get a bear to be trained, and he said it would only work if you'd grown up with the bear and you have mutual respect for each other.
Yes.
So was this a kind of tension in you, in thinking, well, I've got a performing bear and I don't really believe in performing animals, and how can I make this all right in the story? Was there any of that going on?
Yeah, I think when you're writing for children, there's certainly an awareness of not necessarily what you want to say, but certainly what you don't want to say. So I don't want it to, in a book where I've made it very serious. You know, it begins with a bear attack. There's nothing magical about that. It's serious and it's real, and the whole community are having to deal with the shock of that they almost lost a child, but they didn't. And to then come to it and say, well, you've got this creature that is in fact still wild, but it's ice skating with a small girl. How is that dealt with? So that it had to be approached with a sensitivity and with a sense of this didn't just happen overnight. They had to grow up together, and they had to train together, and they have to do everything together, and that is the only way that it can work. And really, Winter's Promise is his show name, doesn't listen to anyone apart from Tuesday. That's the point we've reached now, 8 years on, and it's becoming a problem.
You talked a little bit about fairy tale, and there are echoes in here of stories. The Daughter of the Snow.
Yeah.
Do you know the Arthur Ransom? That's the Russian story of the Daughter of the Snow. But there are others too, I'm sure.
I did a bit of research, and there are sort of so many, like, folk tale and fairy tale. Different stories are passed down through word of mouth or through text, and they kind of change with each time and with each different culture. I mean, if you look at very early versions of the Snow Queen, it's wildly different to Elsa and Anna. So the stories have different lives in different contexts. And I didn't want to make it a sort of book about magic, but I just wanted to have that kind of softly enchanting theme whispered through it, and the fact that they live in the north, they live so far north, on this sort of magical island, there would be folklore, and there would be stories about children who have been abandoned on the ice, for whatever reason. They've been forgotten, or the parents have died in a blizzard, or whatever. And then it does become sort of mythical. They were left by the bears, one day they'll go back to them. It's almost like the Selkie myth, but with bears instead.
And there's a sense as well that Marv's story at some point will become part of that chain of
potentially
mythic telling.
Yes, yeah,
which is really lovely. Something else that really struck me as I was reading, there seemed to be a real love of the natural world, certainly of seasons and of time. What's your favourite time of the day, interestingly?
I don't know. I think it's probably changed, or perhaps it changes. So I do love the morning, actually.
Do you?
I do, yeah. And I'm not necessarily... I wouldn't describe myself as a morning person, so I don't wake up and sing and, dance around the house in wonder. But I love that kind of... I suppose the sense of the beginning, the new beginning, and it's a new chance and it's a new day, and the sense of possibility. But then I also love the night as well, and I write a lot throughout the night, and a lot of my ideas come at 3 o'clock in the morning. So there's that kind of slightly, that artistic thing of being a little bit out of time, or slightly out of sync with
the rhythm of the day, maybe.
The rhythm of the day. And interestingly, I really committed to writing when my daughter was really young, still a baby, up all night. And I found that a real comfort to be writing at that time. Sometimes it can be comforting and you're sort of relaxed, and that's when the ideas can come.
It's interesting. I'm surprised that you said morning, because I got a strong sense of the possibilities of the night time and twilight.
I do love the night. I do.
The other thing that struck me was how visual, particularly the opening of the story, you can almost see that strong image there. Are you a very visual writer? Do you get images as you write?
Yes, I do, and I think I always view it almost as if it's a film that's happening in the room next door, and I'm just sort of looking in to see what's happening and then writing it down. But I also really love language, and so I get really swept up in sentences, which is a different thing to the visual side.
I should have asked you this at the beginning, whether you would read the opening passage
I'd love
for
to.
us. So this is chapter 1 of Ice Bear Miracle.
Chapter 1, Life with Bears. Somewhere off the coast of Canada, in the deep and frozen north, is an island surrounded entirely by ice. It's not the kind of ice you will ever have known. It is luminous and strange, and there are lost things trapped forever inside it. The fin of an orca, a baby's boot, the figurehead of a ship. In late spring, some of the ice melts, giving way to a cold and wondrous sea, and from May until August, the ice is no more than a whisper, glimpsed only on the surface of the island's rare, frost-glittered lake. But in autumn, the sea begins to slow and freeze, taking its time, until not a single green wave is left. As the leaves on the island turn orange and gold, and the nights lengthen to days of winter dark, that is when the bears come. Giants the colour of snow, lumbering in packs, rolling in on silent paws, their eyes hungry and bright, snouts sniffing at the crisp, pale air.
That was beautiful, and I think that gives a really good flavour of the beginning of the book. I did want to ask you how far north you had personally been. What's your furthest north?
Canada, I would have loved to have gone to Churchill, but to get there, if the snow is too thick, then you can't fly. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get stranded there and be like, sorry, I'm never coming back. So I went to Vancouver in Canada. And then I've also been to Iceland, Reykjavik, which I love. And I think so many of us feel drawn to those kind of northern, sort of slightly ghostly, northern lights, what's going on in the sky, no one really knows, communities, especially throughout the winter months. The idea of Santa Claus is very much alive there, and all of the different really beautiful northern traditions. So I would love to explore more of Scandinavia. I would love to go to Churchill and explore more of Canada. So let's plan a massive book tour.
Let's all go there.
Let's
have a book launch.
Yes. Yeah, on a frozen lake. That would be amazing.
Indeed. Your dedication is to your daughter for this book, isn't it? So how has she influenced your writing?
Well, I think, as with everything, she probably influences everything I do to some degree. She is of dual heritage, and it became very obvious to me when she was born that there aren't enough sort of amazing books that are diverse. And that is changing now. People are doing amazing things to change that. Jasmine Richards, who was one of my editors on this book, she runs this brilliant company called Story Mix. They're doing incredible things. Knights of, who are a publisher and also a fabulous bookshop, they're doing brilliant things. There are lots of other authors who are championing diverse books. I just couldn't write without inclusion in my work. I live in London. I'm a solo parent to a child of dual heritage. I have a disability. On paper we tick so many boxes. I can't just write about a conventional family because it's not the mirror of my world. And also we don't see it enough in literature, and so if I can be a small part of that change, I really want to be. So I knew from the beginning really that I wanted Tuesday in particular to look like Amelie, although Tuesday does have hair that's easier to manage than Amelie's, because if Amelie was living in a carnival with no one brushing her hair, I don't know what would happen. Tuesday sort of puts clove oil and brushes her hair out that way. But, I haven't seen a book with a brown ice skater in. I'm sure there are some somewhere in the world. I haven't found one. So let's have one that's accessible. Let's have one that people can see and that people can get hold of. And it's not a big part of the story, but it is a part of the story. And, there are multiple different strands really that become the tapestry that is the book. And that is one of them.
I think what I would say is that it's a significant part of the story without it being a focus of the story, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
It's not tokenism, it's significant and it's
significant
meaningful.
To her.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's not about that, so it manages to do
No, it's about the bear.
Yeah.
Really. And about the relationship between the two.
Yes, yeah. I was going to ask you what you're working on at the moment, Cerrie.
I am working on another story. It hasn't been announced yet, so I'm not allowed to say what it is, but it's a story that has diversity at its heart, but it's very fairy tale based. So I've sort of gone, it's a fairy tale retelling, combining lots of different fairy tales and sort of lesser known folklore, and it's set in a timeless fairy tale time, and it has a disabled heroine at its heart.
Fantastic, Cerrie. I've loved Ice Bear Miracle. I'm
I'm
sure it's
so
going to find lots
glad.
of great readers.
I hope so. I hope lots of people will fall madly in love with Promise and want to take up skating.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to In the Reading Corner with Just Imagine. If you have enjoyed this podcast, you can find many more on the podcast section of our website, justimagine.co.uk, plus via iTunes or SoundCloud or your usual podcast provider. Don't forget to pass the pod and recommend this fantastic free resource to your friends and colleagues.